Next up, Kate Chopin, also referred to as Kate Chopin, potato, not the most important thing we need to look at. What we do need to look at is that she, too, is really emblematic of the American experience in the 19th century. She's the daughter of immigrants, her father being of Irish extraction and also becoming a very successful businessman in the St. Louis area in Missouri. And St. Louis is really, really important at this point because it really represents the westernmost focal point for finance, commerce, and culture during this point. Tragically, her father died when she was roughly 4 years old. Now, continuing on with this very American story, we also know that she was married to a businessman in New Orleans. So she goes a little bit south and a little bit east. And also tragically, slightly more than a decade after she was married, she was widowed, her husband died, and she was left with 6 children. Now, what is very interesting about her origin story so far is that as the daughter of an Irish immigrant, she was a member of an underrepresented and also maligned immigrant group. Irish Americans at this point were considered to be undesirable, and there are a couple of reasons for it. One is that they were Catholic, and most of the power structure in the United States is still revolving around white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans. And this is still the case today to a certain extent, although it is changing a little bit. So the Irish were considered a minority and were not even really considered white. The Irish were also, very much in opposition to the British Empire and to all things English. And part of the reason for that is that Ireland had been under the imperial control of the British Empire for roughly 1,000 years at this point, too. So there was all kinds of prejudicial and stereotypical belief systems revolving around their inferior status. But she ends up in New Orleans, which is another very interesting place in the United States. If you have never been, I strongly recommend you go. Don't go during Mardi Gras. It's just like a gross Southern frat party. But go there for the food. Cajun and Creole cuisine are arguably two of the most original and most American food cultures in the United States. And New Orleans is also the origin of jazz, too, which is hands down the most original and most influential musical genre that the United States of America has contributed to the world musical canon. She's a regionalist writer, and this brings us to a really important term. Regionalism is all about writing in a way that you are mirroring the lifestyles and the word choice and the sounds of a particular people in a particular part of the United States. And we saw this a little bit in Jewett, in The White Heron, and we see it a lot in Kate Chopin. She will definitely spell things out the way they should sound. And gosh, if you want me to, I will do a whole different video just about how these things sound. And I think this is really important when we look at the Kate Chopin story that we're reading for this week, because there was a lot of this really important formative work in regionalist phonetic writing during her time. So she sets a lot of her stories in St. Louis and also New Orleans, and also in rural or agricultural Louisiana. Um, and she talks about very specific subcultures and subgroups within the American nation at this time. Catholic Creoles, um, who are people who have been transplanted into the New Orleans area and often have French roots, and often Caribbean roots as well, and Cajuns. And Cajuns are originally a French extraction from a region up in Canada known as Acadia, and that kind of got changed through phonetic uh, merging and blending over time to become the word Cajun. That brings me to Cajun food, which is a combination of local foodstuffs, livestock, and whatever they could grow at that place, at that particular region, with French cooking technique. So in some ways, very old world, but also very renewed and new and completely different. You can feel the French influence in a lot of Cajun cooking, but the flavor profiles are so different and so vibrant and often really brutally hot. Great stuff. And Kate Chopin will ever be known in American literature because she took head on patriarchal and dominant repressive social rules about women and how they fit into society during that time, and also their relationship to sexuality. In some ways, she's a very nice counterpoint to Walt Whitman. Kate Chopin also, through her stories, including After the Storm, posits the idea that um, women are not just sexual objects, but sexual subjects. They are not just to be acted upon, but they are actors and agents in and of themselves. Um, they are their own persons and are just as complex and um, just as interested in these very, very uh, crucial and common, elements of human existence as are men. Of course, this really, really throws the male hierarchy into a tizzy during that time. I don't know what the male equivalent of pearl clutching is, but there was a lot of that going on when Kate Chopin's work came out. Um, I know some of you have probably read The Story of an Hour. That's a fantastic one, with a very interesting feminist twist on the end. But After the Storm goes even farther. But the literary work that really put her on the map was The Awakening, just at the turn of the 20th century, because she basically, through her main character, provides this idea that women are equals of men across the board in terms of their mental and emotional and financial capacities. They are not just pawns to be moved around the board, but they are active and potent agents on their own. So important. A little bit of background about Kate Chopin. Her life is very well documented, and she is highly revered still in St. Louis and in New Orleans. There she is with some of her sons. All I can say is, wow. I only had 3, and I have never written anything close to what Kate Chopin has accomplished. Really nice chance to us to take a look at, late 19th century portraiture too. It's still very staid, it's still very posed, but at the same time, you are seeing some different elements evolve. just a little bit of geographical background and character I'd like to insert here. This is the New Orleans, very close to the time of Kate Chopin's writings and her living there. And if you go down certain streets in New Orleans, you will still see certain elements of this architecture and this street layout still in circulation today. You see some neoclassical elements, but you will also see these wrought iron rails, which is very much a New Orleans feature. You will see that especially in the French Quarter. So historically and architecturally, it's a place that is still reverberating history. Again, stay away from the tourist spots. I mean, if you're going all the way over there just to go down Bourbon Street, just go get hammered in your hometown. You're not going to remember anything anyway. What's the point? It's such a rich place in American history. I could speak volumes about it, but I don't have time right now. Got one more slide for you. And this is about Desiree's Baby. Desiree's Baby is a really important short story that Chopin also wrote. And, oh shoot, I should have made these animate one at a time here. But this story actually shows the depth and complexity of Chopin as a writer. Not only does she write about the place of women in American society and pushes back against these really biased assumptions, she also does the same thing for race. In this short story, Desiree's Baby, there's this upper class woman who basically finds out through the birth of her baby that she may have African American ancestry. Now, of course, this is a huge social problem in the 19th century, and perhaps even still in the 20th century. Some of us have probably heard those urban myths about, somebody having a baby and it doesn't look like anybody else because of certain complexion. This, in some ways, is the high literature version of that. Desiree is an upright, seemingly completely white woman, and her only supposed crime is that maybe somewhere in her past, she has some African ancestry. Now, this picture here I got from the Norton Supplementary Materials, and it's got this very questionable title, Quadroon Type at Ponce, Puerto Rico. Quadroon means somebody who is 1/4 African in descent. Quad, like quattro, right? Desiree is supposedly 1/4 African ancestry, but was very, very light skinned, so much as she could pass. And passing as a different race is a really important literary trope in the 19th century. And we see that in lots of different points of literature. And again, quadroon, let me just reemphasize this. You'll see this in 19th century literature. You'll also see it in Faulkner, who is 20th century. It is a derogatory term, but unfortunately a very common one at that. So, large point I want you to have coming through all of this is that Kate Chopin not only is incredibly compelling on the state of gender in the 19th century, but also the state of race. And because of that, she was vilified in many popular presses during the time, but she is one of our greats. I hope you enjoyed reading her. After the Storm is a really important follow-up to a story called After the Cajun Ball. And really, the point behind it is that Calixta is a woman who is not a sexual object. I mean, not a sexual object, but a sexual subject. She desires this man, I'll say, and she ends up having him. And there is no negative consequence because of that. Everything goes on.